Well, welcome to our live. This is Hosanna Hansen, and I have a wonderful guest and friend, Todd Strohsnyder, with me today with the company Tractus. We have had some wonderful experience of working together, and I know that you have started Tractus a few years ago, but thank you so much for joining this month. I know people, as we're entering into our third quarter, are starting to focus on budgets. And so I wanted to bring you on just so that we could start talking about development and training, and specifically because I know this is your area of
Yep.
specialty.
Thank
And
you.
I would love just my audience to be able to hear from you as they start thinking and planning for 2025. But before we get into some of that nitty gritty, Todd, I would love our audience just to hear a little bit about you, your journey, and how you started and founded Tractus.
Thanks, Hosanna. Well, it's been obviously been a pleasure working with you and knowing you for all these years. Thank you for inviting me to be here.
Absolutely.
My passion really is around leadership development, learning and development. Not sure if I would call myself an expert, but someone who's seen a lot and done a lot and learned a lot over the last several years. It really started even back in college in my, extracurricular activities was really involved in helping, build programs, build leaders, even in colleges with students. And then left, college, started my corporate life and was really just focused in HR. And my true interest is really in helping teams and leaders be more effective. And if leaders can be more effective, their employees will be happier and be more productive at work and at home. And so did that for multiple organizations and kind of grew into different roles. Where I kind of most recently, where we worked together, was
Yeah.
leading the L&D function for our corporation we were a part of, and was given the opportunity to build different programs, work on succession planning, work on leadership development, high potential programs, performance management. And then what ultimately brought me to where I am now is learning technology. And so I know we can
Mm.
dive into that as we get a little bit further, but it's been a great road of about 25 years, and looking forward to at least another 25, because it's been a great ride.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I know when we worked together, you played such an instrumental role. That's when I first kind of entered into the corporate world, and you were over all of the training at that point and just that
Right.
onboarding process. And you did such a fantastic job. I felt onboarded so well and just
Thank you.
provided the things that I needed. Um, as we start looking, and as companies and leaders start looking towards 2025, and they're starting to allocate their funds now,
Mm.
what recommendations or key areas should organizations prioritize when it comes to this learning development training area for their leaders and teams?
Right. Yeah, there's a lot there, and I think there's the leaders and there's the teams, and there's definitely an overlap in what leaders should be getting and should be how they should be developing, and then what they should be providing to their teams, and how the organization should also be providing resources for their teams. So I think to me the first piece of this is whether you call it a needs assessment or an analysis, and what do people want, what do people need, what do leaders want, what do leaders need. A lot of the organizations that we work with have done a survey of some sort, and have learned through that process where their strengths are and where there may be some opportunities for
Mhm.
different growth and different resources for their teams, whether it's the leadership group or the other employees. And so um, you know, leveraging that information and finding out, what specifically are we needing to focus on. You can't do everything well, so you got to try to think about where do you want to start. What feedback was really valuable? What made the most difference? Involve the business in those decisions. Don't just make it kind of an HR initiative. When you kind of, if you're part of the HR community or learning community right now on the broadcast, involve others in the business. Just because something you see in some data, talk to your leaders, understand what's going on, talk to your front lines, understand what their interests and their needs are. And I would say, myself included, I kind of want to boil the ocean sometimes. I want to address everything, I want to fix everything, but I know you got to start small, and you can't just do everything at one time, and work with your colleagues, work with others in the learning community, other organizations you have in your network, find out what they're doing, and try to find out the best place to start. I know budgets are often going to be, we're talking about budgeting now, but
Yeah.
budgets are going to be all over the place. Sometimes you have a budget you're going to continue on with, or you maybe add a little bit. Sometimes it's the first time you're trying to get a budget passed for something. So try to go into it with starting small and building off of that, and that would be the kind of the best way for you to kind of even change the culture a little bit. Some organizations haven't had a lot of opportunities for training and development, learning, and programs and resources. So you need to understand the culture of your organization to see how it will be received. What type of content are they looking for? What formats? Are they looking for in person? They're looking for virtual? Are they looking for on demand? All those things are going to be important. So there's a lot to it, like I said. But it doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be focused.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to rabbit trail just a little bit because you mentioned, the culture.
Right.
What's the culture of your organization or your company, and the specific format in which they might receive information. But if you don't mind, I might take us down just a little rabbit trail
Mhm.
just with regards to, I know you've been in this industry for so long. Could you talk a little bit about what kind of culture impacts you've seen for those who maybe don't focus, or
Mhm.
maybe they tend to, cut that budget, or with your experience, I would love for us maybe to talk about the negative, because
Yep.
sometimes we need to, we just think, okay, well, I'll get to it later, but we don't
Right.
realize the impact that it might play.
Sure. Yeah, I think we could probably have a whole another conversation on culture. Uh,
Right? Yes.
but I think I just say, be very intentional with the culture you're trying to create if you're in a leadership role to influence that, and know that culture is a very powerful force. And so if there's the terms learning culture, culture of learning, and that's really something I've been really involved with a lot in different organizations I've been a part of or consulted with. Um, and so we all have to be very aware that the world is changing rapidly around us. So if we aren't learning and growing, our productivity will go down, our happiness. People will start to feel like if they don't have resources to keep up with what's happening, that they're going to fall behind. They're going to leave an organization, or they will stay and not be able to, deliver the results that you're asking for. So, making sure that you feel like the culture that's being developed is really going to be around, you know, i- improvement, growth, development, and and it's again at every level. There's definitely a piece that leaders play, and leaders are in between. Typically the senior most, and then those that they're leading, and they need to be able to feed themselves as well as feed others, and they need to be able to understand the specific needs that their teams have and how to champion those and how to make sure that those are things that they can um, really that they can really help commit to, and they
Mm,
can help make sure that they feel like their team is supported, and that will then contribute to that culture overall. Because again,
right.
what you'll see sometimes is majority is really doing great things, and if one or two folks are not, they're going to really show up. So you want to make sure that you're part of that success and positive culture building.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for letting me take us a little bit
Sure,
on that
of
rabbit
course, of
trail.
course.
But when we talk about, leaders and really them being that middle, very important role that
Mhm.
they play, what common challenges do organizations typically face when it comes to developing their leaders? And what have you seen that has helped in helping them overcome those challenges?
Mhm. I think what I see is kind of where I started off a little earlier about boiling the ocean, trying to do too much. Leaders are very busy, like you said, they're in between. They have, folks that they're obviously reporting to develop and grow and getting the results through their teams. And so when you're adding on a lot of development requirements for your leaders, it can be very difficult. There's always the sign we never have time. Everybody in every organization I've worked with says, I don't have
Yes.
time. It's the whole thing. We always say, if you don't have, what happens if you don't do it, right?
Mhm.
There's going to be a bigger risk of not doing something than finding the time to do whatever it is that you need to. So one thing I'd say is a challenge is kind of doing too much, and with that becomes a confusing leaders of what are the true expectations of the leader in that role. So what are the competencies, what are those things that all leaders at your organization need to be able to exhibit, and what are the core values, how do they espouse those values with the
Mhm.
teams that they're leading. And leaders are colleagues as much as they are leading a team. And so what is their
Right.
commitment? What are their expectations to other leaders in the organization, whether they're, the frontline leader or the senior leadership team? And the fact is it's really key to understand that, you are part of a team as well as leading a team. And so, trying to understand where your commitments are, and try to keep it simple as much as you can, or try to not, as someone who's maybe putting programs together, or putting together resources for folks, to try not to overwhelm them. Another thing I often say, is maybe it's a way to overcome, but it's also just a way to really embed leadership within the organization. Is you have the kind of across the organization competencies and values, but then all leaders have different needs. We all have different development opportunities, strengths, and weaknesses. And so really
Right.
focusing on helping leaders develop individually, as well as fitting into that culture, fitting that organization expectation. So I say not to overwhelm and don't do a lot, but I'm also saying make sure you do cover at least those two bases. Something that's going to make sure everyone understands we're aligned as a team. This is leadership at
Right.
X company, and this is what I'm doing in addition to that, because I have specific strengths and weaknesses that I need to focus on to be effective.
Yes, absolutely. I was reading this book called Nine Lives About Work. And one of the things that they mentioned, which I think we've started to see this shift over the past few years, is, there was a period of time where these companies were drawing people in because of their culture, because of things they did. And it was
Right.
very attractive and luring them in. And it was great. But what we're seeing is it's really people stay at the organization based on their direct team and their
Yep.
direct leader.
Right.
And that's what makes a company sticky, is that little microcosm right there. And if you have a team that's doing really well, organization or company, look at that. And then if you
Right.
have some that aren't, then how can we come in and bolster? Because we want to make sure that you stay sticky. We
Mhm.
don't want
Yeah.
you to go through that attrition cycle and spend all that money.
Yeah. It's a great point. It's changed over the last several years as work evolves, and the hybrid working structures are in place. And why I say that is because traditionally in the past, we spend more time with in the same building, the same team as our leader. And so
Right.
we go home with our families or friends or whoever, and our day is again consumed mostly at work and with that person. So that leader has a huge impact on the rest of your day, the rest of your week, the rest of your life. And so
Right.
you really want to make sure that you take that role seriously if that's the position that you're in, and make sure that you're doing the things to be the example that you want to be displayed by your team.
Yeah. That's a really good point too, as we just talk about, we have this evolving workforce because
Mhm.
some still are in office, some are primarily remote, and then we
Right.
have this hybrid. So when it comes to training and development, what have you seen in that space for those organizations or company that might be dealing with that hybrid piece? Well, yeah, I
Right.
have, part of my staff here, but then I have part of my staff that's remote. What does that look like? And how do we take that into consideration when we're looking at training and development?
Yeah, no, it's $1 million question. I don't think anybody that I've seen has it perfect yet, or has gotten
Yeah.
it exactly right, because the needs change, interests change. The younger workforce that's joining, their expectations and how they have consumed learning, and how they've worked through college or higher education. Um, so I think you really just have to put together a really thorough strategy on how and what do you want to um, leverage for your learning
Mhm.
programs. So there is tremendous value in bringing people together. It is costly,
Mm.
it's
Yeah.
time consuming, but it can go long ways in helping again solidify the
Mhm.
culture. It's those conversations between conversations. It's the having breakfast before the meeting. It's in the hallways we talk about. It's the things you can't do when you're on a Zoom or on a phone call or in a a session. And so that is still very important if companies can do that. If you can't, still the virtual togetherness is still kind of the next best thing. So bring them together through an online you know tool to collaborate, to share, to communicate that message across the
Mhm.
organization. So maybe it's something the business happens, the CEO or the senior leaders need to communicate that, make sure everybody hears it at the same time, the same message, and reiterate that and follow up. But because also I mentioned we're all busy and we all, every level and every role within
Yeah.
a company is busy. It's providing those on-demand resources. How do I go get what I need
Mhm.
when I need it?
Yeah.
And that goes back to content that I touched on a little bit earlier. Is we are overwhelmed with content. We are flooded with content. It's
Yes.
hard to know what's good, what's not good. Fortunately, there's a lot of great free resources out there, but you have to kind of sift through those. More isn't always better. Better is better. Relevant,
Yeah.
quality, and really what fits your organization. What works for some may not work for others. So, what type of on-demand, resources work best for your team? Is it a subscription to a library? Is it going to be individual reimbursement for training that people want to
Mm.
go out and get on their own? Formal versus informal. So think back in that strategy, what can we do to be able to provide the right resources for those who are working wherever they may be working. It doesn't mean that they can have access to the same tools based on maybe where they work. Maybe locations are limiting on what they can actually do. And if they're in a position and they work certain hours and you can't allow them to just go out and train on their own time for labor laws and regulations. That's another thing to consider. So
Yeah.
there's a lot to it, but I think if you would try to think through what do I want to accomplish over the course of the year, and knowing I have a workforce that's distributed, multiple locations, time zones, demographics. You just got to think through what are the key pieces of that I need to make sure I include in my strategy.
Yeah, that is so good. When you talk about bringing people together, have you noticed that there's a good cadence in which to do that?
Mm.
Like, is it quarterly? Is it at least twice a year, once a year, or again, is it just dependent?
Yeah, it really is just dependent. I think it's company size. It's going to be, what's happening in the organization at that time. You know,
Mhm.
a quarter goes by really fast. So, do we
Okay.
have enough to talk about, that's going
Yeah.
to be worth bringing people together? But there's also just the consistency and messaging
Mhm.
and, making sure people feel that they're not only being told what needs to happen, but they're also being heard. So
Mhm.
these types of situations or, trainings, if you will, or meetings should be two-way. They shouldn't necessarily always be just a one way. You can communicate one way in various forms and different mediums, but if you really want to be able to connect with your teams, your leaders, your employees, your front lines, make sure that you give them the opportunity to speak, ask questions, and those types of things. One of our clients here in the Dallas area we work with, they do a monthly leadership meeting, and they have lunch and they have a very clear agenda. They have people on teams that can't join in person so that they know this is what we're going to be doing, what we're going to be talking about,
Yeah.
very clearly laid out. Others we work with to do it twice a year. My team, we bring our group together from all over the US. And we come together twice a year. And we do a lot of weekly meetings actually on teams. But so it's really just going to depend on what's going on in the business. You know, they always say you can never over communicate, and I'm kind of in
Mhm.
that same vein. I feel like
Yeah.
just when you think you've said it enough, you probably should say it a couple more
Say it
times. So
again.
yeah,
Yes.
and so that means if the best way to do that is through having these kind of meetings to bring people together, and again, meeting slash training, I kind of use them interchangeably because
Yeah.
when you're having these group conversations, you're probably giving them information they didn't know before and training
Right.
them on something about what's happening in the business or specific to their role or level in the company.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, I know that our time is kind of starting coming to an end.
Okay.
So
Wow.
I have this the final question.
Okay.
For those just kind of on a smaller scale, um, and how would you what help would you or advice would you give them when it comes to just simplifying? I know we've talked about a myriad of things, but what final just like 1, 2, 3 step or a couple of things would you give an organization or company just to think about as they start going in as to not get overwhelmed?
Yeah. So just I didn't really talk about this at the beginning, but Tractus, we work primarily with small to mid-sized organizations. So we are working with companies typically that have one person in HR, maybe two that are doing training, they're doing benefits, they're doing all the HR stuff. And so time and resources, whether they're financial or just their own capacity, is usually more limited than in some of the larger enterprises that you see out there. So when we focus on those, we try to help them prioritize what's the most important. And I'll go back to content because oftentimes small mid-sized companies, they don't have resources to build courses and training programs. They want to go out and need to find something, but finding something that's affordable and that kind of fits their business can be a challenge. And so I think it's really look and see, what are the key priorities and really try to focus in on that. Try not to just, my recommendation would be try not to just assume that going out and getting a massive, content library is going to solve what, maybe the training problems or requests that are coming in,
Right.
because that can also cause problems for people to overwhelm them with too much. They start
Mhm.
with go from nothing to a massive library of 20,000 courses. It can be hard. Kind of find out what are the most important pieces that you need to communicate and what your leaders need, what your front line needs, what's really going to be important for them. So I would say that's one of the key features is the content. The platform that you use is often tied to that. So
Mm.
content providers sometimes have a platform you can use that will be able to help you distribute it, help you track it, share it. I mean, a lot of the great new features around AI and machine
Yeah.
learning and really personalizing learning. It's kind of more of the table stakes now and learning. So closely connected to that content as a platform if you don't have something. And then I think the what we also find a lot of times is companies are growing and their and onboarding is a huge piece of the
Yeah.
learning puzzle, right? It's not, it
Yeah.
covers everybody like we talked about for you and I working together early on. It
Yeah.
touches everybody in the organization, whatever level you're in. And you know, who's doing that? How much time is that requiring? Do you have the right resources? You don't have to, be an HR team of one and you just run yourself ragged. Bring in your SMEs, your subject matter experts and your leaders to help you with those things. Um, and again, like I'll go back to the beginning of the conversation, start small. You don't have to do everything at once, especially if you haven't been doing much of anything for however
Right.
long you've been working, then, it's going to be a big step. Although it may not feel like it to you because you maybe come from another organization, join a smaller one, and you're like, oh my gosh, we need to do all this stuff. Well, yeah, but over time. So there's a lot to it, but I would think that'd probably be the way I would say be best to get started.
That's good.
And don't and just really don't take, I guess I'm trying to think of with budgeting. There's
Yeah.
so many great resources out there that you don't have to go out and buy a subscription to. So a lot of,
Mm.
I call them freemium, resources that you can use and curate. So you don't have to, spend a lot of money and just making sure you get the right stuff, not just a lot of stuff.
Right. Right. That's so good. Okay. So if I was to quickly recap, focus really on the priorities, the content, the platform of how you're going to distribute, how are your people
Mhm.
going to consume this training, and then make sure what that training is or what you're
Right.
uploading onto that platform or curating is not just a lot, but what is purposeful and meaningful for your particular audience
Correct.
within your organization.
Great.
That's
Yeah.
so awesome. Todd, thank you so much for coming on. I feel like we could probably talk forever, and there's
Yeah.
so many questions that I just kind of bit my tongue because I was like, you know what, another episode. We're gonna
Do it again. Let's do it again. No, I love this.
we're
This
gonna
was
have to do
great.
it
Thank you.
again. But I would love just to end with, if you wouldn't mind, if you could tell us a little bit of what's going on in Tractus, and
Sure.
if people wanted to get connected, how could they connect with you?
think, well, LinkedIn is, kind of my go-to from as far as connecting, trying to get a little more active on there. But, Tractus, our focus really is on small to mid-sized organizations. And, the numbers mean different things to different people. Just for us and our relationships with different partners we have, it's usually around 2,500 employees and below. So that's our sweet spot. We've helped organizations that are just getting started with a few people all the way up to enterprises. So, but that's really we want to try to focus because that's where we feel like it's hard to get access to the best resources, the best pricing in that space. So what we've been doing at Tractus is really working on a lot of partnerships. So we have technology partnerships for LMSs and LXPs, content providers through developing content for really affordably, really good, high quality content, as well as content libraries. So we can help you get the
Mm,
right content and maybe not have to invest in 20,000 courses, but maybe just get 100 or 250 or so. We do a lot around leadership development programs, building content. So I know this is a big focus here was leadership, and that is a continued
yeah.
passion of mine for 30 plus years now. And finally, I mentioned onboarding because a lot of those organizations we do work with that are in the small to mid-size, they're growing. And so they need help providing the right resources to their teams as they're onboarding them. And it's like we talked about in a environment where people are working all over the place, you can't bring them into a conference room and do a new
Yeah.
employee orientation as easily. So how do we leverage technology and the right content and tools to onboard employees? So that's really what we focus on. That's I think we specialize in. So if anybody here that's watching is interested in learning more, if you know anybody that may be in that situation, please reach out to us. Just would love to have a conversation and see if we can help. If we can help, we can help likely get you in the hands of someone who can.
Absolutely. Well, that is awesome. We'll be sure to put your information in the comments below so
Thank
anyone
you.
watching or rewatching has the ability to connect with you. And Todd, thank you so much for coming on. It was such a pleasure, and we have to do it again.
Will do. Thanks, Suzanne. I really appreciate it. Thank everyone for watching as well. Thank you.